Well, good evening, and welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. And we have been studying the high Sabbaths. We started with the Sabbath first. We really have to have this understanding of the Sabbath itself. Um, and then we've been moving into the high Sabbaths, which are the different festivals and things of that nature. And so we're going to continue on talking about Passover and all the things associated with the Passover. And then we'll continue on with all of those. Hopefully, in the next week or two, though, rather than me coming to you from my home, we'll be doing this from our church. We're almost finished with all of our construction work that's been going on. So we'll be doing this from there instead of here, which also allows people to actually come and be a part of the Bible study in person, which I would really much rather do and enjoy because it actually forwards people the opportunity to ask questions. Now, you can ask questions, by the way, in case you didn't know that. You can ask questions. You type it in, it'll come up, and hopefully I'll see it and I'll be able to answer that. So you can ask questions as we go along. Feel free to do that. I don't think I've really been mentioning that much, but you can ask questions during these live sessions. But here in a few weeks, hopefully we will be doing this from live from our church because again construction is almost complete. I went by there today, and it is amazing. It looks great. And so anyway, we'll be revealing a lot of that to you really soon. Okay. um, all right, so we're talking about the high Sabbath today. We'll be in Exodus and Genesis as we talk about the Passover. And what we're going to focus on tonight is so the Passover, which is a high Sabbath, has different components to it. And you can almost say even different little festivals within this holiday. And so, what we're going to talk about tonight is the Festival of Unleavened Bread. So, when we look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 39, here's what it says. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. So, if we go back to what we've been talking about over the past few weeks, when the Israelites left Egypt, it was quickly. I mean, it was a release that took place, and they had to go. Um, and God knew that that was going to take place. So if we think about what happened, He gave Moses very specific orders of what they were supposed to do, very specific commands, if you will, that they were how what to eat and when to eat it, and put the blood over the doorpost, and then essentially telling the Israelites to pack up and just be ready to go. And so there was really no time to make substantial provisions in the journey that they were about to take. Once the order was given that they were going to be released, that Egypt was going to allow them to leave, they were to go and to go quickly. And this really speaks to God's omniscient. I always mispronounce that word, um, but it but omniscience. You know what I'm saying? It means having knowledge of all things, a universal knowledge, and this word comes from two Latin words, omnis, which means all, and scientia, which means knowledge. And that particular word is where we get the word science. So for a believer, this means that we believe that God knows everything. God knows everything about the past. He knows everything about the present. He knows everything about the future. So God knows everything. So if you take your life, for instance, God has known your complete path, every decision that you're going to make, how you're going to do things in life. Like He has just known that. So God knew it would take all of those plagues to move Pharaoh to allow the people of Israel to be released, to go. And he knew that once they were released, that Pharaoh would then pursue them. So God made sure that they were prepared for the journey. He told them what to eat and what to take. And when the time came, they left quickly. But again, God also knew what Pharaoh was going to do. So when we go back to Exodus chapter 14, here's what it says about that occurrence that took place. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon, and you shall encamp facing it by the sea. For Pharaoh will say to the people of Israel, They are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. They did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, What is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots, and all the chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out definitely. So, God knows what's going to happen, but also in the same aspect, God does things to make things happen as well. And why is that? Why does God do things to make sure that that plan is carried out? Well, first and foremost, it's his plan. In this case, in this instance, what is happening is that God is wanting to show Egypt that he is the true and living God. So we see that he has the 10 plagues. Pharaoh finally lets them go. And then Pharaoh pursues them. They get close. And the people of Israel know that they are close. And they know what is seemingly what is about to happen. And that is either A, slaughter, or B, they're going to wind up in bondage again, right back in Egypt. So the Israelites go to Moses and they start crying out and whining about what have you done and why did you let us go or get us out of Egypt? We were fine, we were okay. This is actually a theme that carries out throughout even the wilderness as they wandered the wilderness, right? They were just crying and whining about everything. So God tells Moses to hold out his staff and over the sea. And then, of course, as we know, as we study the book of Exodus, that sea parts. And not only does it part, but it makes the land dry enough that the Israelites and their carts and their animals, they can all move freely across the sea. And as they get across the sea, Pharaoh and the chariot show up. Now, I want you to picture in your mind 600 chariots that are barreling down on the Israelites, going after them. And as they go into the sea and the Israelites come out, Pharaoh and his chariots are coming through. As soon as the Israelites are out, we know that that sea essentially caves in, right? It's no longer parted, it caves in on them, taking Pharaoh and his army and the chariots and the horses and everything with it. God is showing Egypt he is the true and living God. Look what I did. I had all of these plagues that fell upon you. The last one, the most devastating plague, the firstborn dying in the home. Then I parted the sea, and my people were able to cross with no problem. But then after they crossed, as you, Egypt, were pursuing them, I closed the sea back up. God is being glorified, and God is showing who he is to the people of Egypt. God's plan is being carried out. It was carried out. God knew what was going to happen. He knew how to make it happen. And it all played out the way that he needed it to play out and how it would play out. He used the opportunity to glorify himself because that story gets out. So we are in the book of Joshua on Sunday mornings. In the beginning of the book of Joshua, as they are going and crossing over the Jordan, in the same way they crossed the sea as they left Egypt, they cross over the Jordan. The stories have already been heard throughout the new promised land. The stories are out there. They know that they left Egypt. These different people groups know the Israelites wandered the desert for 40 years. They know they've crossed the Jordan. They know the stories. God was glorified through that happenstance that takes place, through that event that takes place with them leaving Egypt, crossing the sea, and then, of course, the sea closing in on the Egyptians. God is glorified in that. So the Israelites flee quickly. And so, again, no time to really prepare bread the proper way. So the bread that they would make would come from Egypt, and it was unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is any of a wide variety of breads which are prepared without using a raising agent such as yeast, right? For those who cook, you know, if you put flour and water and yeast together, it causes the dough to rise. You make bread or whatever it is that you're going to make out of it. They were unable to do that. And so they could only make bread that was unleavened, that is not risen. And so God commands the Israelites to eat the unleavened bread before they leave Egypt. We see that Exodus chapter 12, verse 8, they shall eat the flesh that night, talking about the animals that they slaughter to use the blood to put over the post. Roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Again, we got to remember Exodus chapter 12, verse 8, when we talk about the cedar meal next week. Okay. So during Passover, Jews celebrate the festival of unleavened bread. So during this time, Jews do not eat any bread that is leavened or made to rise. Any flour that expands in contact with water is not eaten for 7 days. And this bread is called matzah or matzah, depending on how it's made or used. So not only can you not eat anything with a raising agent in it like yeast, but the Israelites have to get rid of all of it. All raising agents within the home must be removed. So traditionally, what would happen is that a Jewish family would sell off, they would find it within the home, collect it, and then either give it away or sell it off to someone who is not Jewish and allow, so they could use it. But it was all an effort to get it out of their home. This is what they do every single year. It's a major ordeal. Anyone who is a devout, practicing Jew, they are cleaning their home. They are cleaning out the cabinets. They are cleaning utensils. So let's take utensils, for instance. If you have that utensil that is used, to mix the flour, the raising agent such as yeast and the water and whatever else that you're using to make bread, those utensils have to be cleaned a very specific way, usually with boiling water. Now, if the utensil has a type of surface where maybe it's possible some yeast attached itself to it and it's still there, they actually have to take all those utensils and pack them away and put them away somewhere so that they are not even around during the festival of unleavened bread. So they're getting rid of utensils, any dishes that are used that could have some type of residue still left behind. They're cleaning out all the cabinets. I mean, essentially, it's a spring cleaning. I mean, they're taking everything out, cleaning the cabinets, making sure there's no yeast anywhere to be found within the house. Sort of. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But this is part of the uh, festival, part of the understanding of what they need to do to properly observe Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. So all of that cleaning takes place, gathering everything together. And I said they sort of get rid of all of the yeast. So there's this thing that they do, and it's kind of like a little game. So before the dinner of the first night of Passover, one person in the home will begin the Bedekat Comets, or the search for the leaven. So it is basically a hide and seek game, and I almost liken it to Easter eggs, right? What happens at Easter? Well, we have eggs and we dye them, or now a lot of people just get the plastic eggs and we fill them with things and we hide them like out in the yard, and so the kids can go out and they can search for eggs on Easter. It's kind of like that in a way, and maybe it's possible. Maybe the Easter egg hunt was born from this search of leaven that takes place in the household. I don't know that for a fact, so I don't go out telling people I said that because I don't really know. But what they would do is they would hide like 10 pieces of leavened bread and a little bit of yeast somewhere in the house. And so the idea is to go out and to find all of these different things within the house. And typically it happens at night. Typically it happens with a candle and not any other light. Now, I did read where, because modern day and some people use a flashlight and whatever, and that's okay. It kind of takes away from the ambiance a little bit from the original traditional way of looking, but, to each their own. And so they would take these candles and they would begin to look around the house and to look for these things. In the meantime, there is a blessing that is given. And it says this. So at the beginning of the search, somebody says, "Who has sanctified us by the commandments and commanded us to remove the leaven?" And then the search begins. And obviously, they want to leave something out because otherwise, that little prayer blessing that they give doesn't make a whole lot of sense, right? So there's got to be something. That's why they hide, somewhere in the house, and they go around with the candlelight and they go look. So here's what happens. So they take all of that leavened bread and they put it in a bowl or some kind of container. Then wherever they find the yeast or raising agent, they sweep that into a bag using a feather. They throw the feather in the bag along with the yeast, and they save it for the next morning. The next morning, they get up and they go out and they burn the leavened bread and the yeast. And a rabbi whose book I use in some of my Old Testament studies talked about it, and he says in Jerusalem that morning you can walk around Jerusalem, and throughout Jerusalem you can smell the burning of the leavened bread, and you can smell, and the yeast and all those things. He's like, it's just kind of one of those things. We all have traditions, and there are certain smells that we can think of that remind us of maybe Christmas or Easter or some special occasion. And he said for him, that smell is a special occasion for him because just walking around Jerusalem and smelling that of all the people who are participating. And he said sometimes it's not just a family. A lot of times when we celebrate or they celebrate, it's with family. But sometimes the whole neighborhood gets involved, and the neighborhood just has like a big bonfire. And everyone brings their leavened bread and their yeast, and they throw it to the fire as a community. So rather than it just being a family, the whole community gets involved, and they have this kind of ritual thing that takes place the morning after Passover begins. Well, that was kind of cool, kind of neat. We all have our traditions, but even within hours, we still celebrate. Pretty soon, we're going to be celebrating Christmas, and we have a very specific way that we as a church do that. And so we're going to be doing some of those traditional things again this year as we're bringing that back. And we couldn't last year for obvious reasons, but we are this year, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fun and neat, and we'll participate in those traditions together. But then on our own, on like Christmas morning or Christmas Eve, we have our own little traditions that we do. Right, your house is different than my house. When I was growing up, we opened gifts on Christmas Eve. I don't know why, but we did. We opened all our gifts on Christmas Eve, and of course, Christmas morning, maybe a few extra things that Santa brought to us. But in our house, we don't even put presents under the tree. So even today, with our kids being young adults, they don't see a thing when they come home for Christmas. It is just a tree with decorations, and the next morning it's all laid out for them. That's our tradition. We all have those. And in Judaism, they have it too. They have their biblical rituals that they do, but then there are the traditional things they do. And the search for the unleavened or for the leavened bread and the yeast and the burning it the next day, that really is a tradition and not a biblical commandment. Okay? So, what does all this symbolize? In Judaism, every festival symbolizes everything. Like for us, Easter is, symbolizing and celebrating, Jesus Christ raising from the dead and living today. Christmas we celebrate because we're celebrating His birth. Essentially, that's what we're celebrating. This particular festival, when the Jews are being pursued by Egypt, and when they are on their journey and they whine to Moses, they whined about everything, really. I mean, honestly, they whined about a lot. And even after the fact, even after they had the promised land, they still whined a lot. But specifically, they whined about being led out of Egypt. So many Jews thought that they would be better just as slaves, to continue to work in the way that they had them working, being a slave. So, and you got to think about that too. It was all they really knew. If you do something, your generation, your people group are doing something for, 300-400 years, it's all that you know. And so their life was crazy when they left Egypt because it was full of uncertainties where they were going and how God was going to take care of them. And, the thoughts go through their minds. Well, was it really that bad? But they whined to Moses. And so you have this uncertainty going on, not really understanding what the future holds. And many of the Jews didn't like it. And so they complained. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is about remembering that event that took place while also distancing themselves from Egypt. So the purpose of the Festival of Unleavened Bread is to say this event took place. And as we observe this event taking place, that God got us out of Egypt, that God, took care of us and got us out of slavery. You're separating yourself from that particular event, celebrating it, and understanding the importance behind it. And certainly the Jews understand the importance of why they needed to get out of Egypt and why God gave them the promised land. And so the Festival of Unleavened Bread is celebrating all of that. Well, the Passover itself celebrates all of that, but again, it's like a little festival remembrance within a bigger festival remembrance. And so this is just one part of it. The unleavened bread distanced themselves from Egypt. The silent search by candlelight is to express an importance to break from the past, a break away from Egypt and slavery. So if we think about Easter, Easter is kind of the same way for us as believers. We celebrate Easter because it is when our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ was raised from the dead. Because of that, our belief in that, We are connected forever with God. We're reconciled. We are saved. We're no longer seen as sinners in God's eyes. So for us, observing Easter is distancing ourselves as well, not from Egypt, but from the sinful person that we used to be. And that's also what we do every time that we take the Lord's Supper. When we remember Christ and his finished work and his broken body and the blood that he shed for us, it's a moment in time to be thankful that we have been distanced from the old self and the new self is so much better. The Jews are celebrating that distance between them and Egypt. Um, the idea about getting rid of all of the raising agent like yeast out of the home is to express the importance or um, to relieve. I'm trying to think how to put this. The importance of that is just to kind of express how Egypt is no longer a part of Israel. So we celebrate the distancing between us and Egypt, and we celebrate the fact that they are no longer part of us, that our hearts are different, that our lives are different, that we have God, and that we are not in slavery anymore. So it's just this celebration of all of those things together. Um, Again, similar to a believer, um, we may say that we believe, but as long as we hold on to the old self, we still have that within our hearts. As long as they hold on to the Egyptian part of things, Egypt is still a part of them, and they haven't let Egypt go. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread is that celebration and reminder that they are separated from Egypt, they are separated from slavery, they are free, but they are free because of God. Again, in the beginning of this lesson, I mentioned that it is God who got them out of Egypt. It is God who got them out of slavery. It is God who commanded them of what to take and how to make it and what was best for their journey. It was God who guided them through. It was God who got them across the sea. It was God who got them to the promised land. And when they rejected that, it was God who took care of them for 40 years in the desert. And then it was God that got them back to the promised land, got them across the Jordan River. And it was God who made sure their enemies were defeated. It was God who did all of those things. The Feast of Unleavened Bread celebrates all of that by not having leaven within inside the house. And for us as a believer in Christ, we should be celebrating that every second of every day. That separation between us that we are now and the old us, the sinner. Today I'm still a sinner, but I'm a sinner saved by grace because of the mercy that God gave me. Because God loved me enough to come in the flesh for me, to die for me, so that in my belief I can go to him and have everlasting life. Because whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. So the matzah, by the way, one last thing. The matzah, the unleavened bread, represents freedom and slavery. Freedom and slavery. So two rabbis, Schneerson and Reeby, wrote this. Pesach, or the Passover, enables us to undergo a personal exodus from Egypt by transcending our individual limits. And freedom, because they identify with the exodus out of Egypt, and in slavery or evil, because eating of leavened bread, that is, bread that rises, symbolizes self-inflated egotism and pride. So by continuing to eat that bread throughout the Passover, It's feeding your ego. It's about the pride that is felt in it, rather than, in a way, lowering yourself to eat something that is not as good, but God commanded to eat as a reminder of who did what for them. So that's our lesson tonight on the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Next week, we're going to talk about the Seder meal. This is the most important meal of the year for the nation of Israel. And in a way, it's the most important meal for us too. Because out of that, on the night of Passover, of the night of the Seder meal, that is when Jesus Christ implemented the Lord's Supper. And so we're going to parallel all of those things next week as we look at the Seder meal and the Lord's Supper. We'll talk about all that next week in our study. Okay. Don't forget Sunday morning 9:30 for Sunday school worship service at 10:30. I hope that you can join us for that. If you can't, we'll be online, and obviously you can watch online. If you have questions, you can email me, pastorg72@gmail.com. You can text me if you have my phone number. You can private Facebook message me here or on my private, personal, not private, my personal Facebook page. It's all there, available to you whenever. Okay, so thanks for joining me. I hope that you got something out of it tonight. Maybe learn a few things tonight, and hopefully we learn more together as we look at the high Sabbath. So have yourself a blessed rest of the week, and hopefully I'll see you Sunday. Good night.